Hello and welcome to another episode of the Maple Dialogues. I'm your host Raman Verma. Today on the Maple Dialogues, we welcome someone whose story truly reflects the complex identity of growing up as a second generation immigrant in Canada in the 1970s and 80s. Born in Canada to Indian student turned citizen parents, our guests faced the harsh realities of racism from a very young age, even within the classroom. Despite all the challenges, including moments of discrimination and even physical assault, he stayed grounded, thanks to the strong resolve and strong personality that he has. Fluent in Hindi, deeply connected to his roots, and yet shaped by Canadian values, he represents a beautiful duality many in our community live with. He once said, "When I go to India, my heart tells me that I belong to this soil, but my brain reminds me that I am a Canadian." After a brief stint working in the US, he returned home to Canada, where he now lives a successful and fulfilling life with his family. His story is one of resilience, identity, and deep cultural pride. So let's welcome Manu to the Maple Dialogues. Hey Manu, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Raman. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thanks for making the time, Manu. I really appreciate this. तुमने हाँ की और यहाँ आने के लिए अग्री किया, उसके लिए थैंक यू सो मच अगेन। कुछ बातें करेंगे तुम्हारे बचपन की और मेरे को पता है तुम्हारे पेरेंट्स 60s में या 70s में कब मूव हुए थे कनाडा में वो?
Yeah, my father, he came here in 60s and he came here as a student actually. He studied in Kanpur. He is graduate of the first batch of in Kanpur actually. And what I understand from him and the circle of friends which also came in that capacity, I never got the direct story, okay? So I'm giving you my version as I understand it. That they were all in their studies there. And actually, in that time, there was a lot of recruitment happening both from USA, Canada, by different institutions, including corporations, including universities. So in the case of my father and some of his friends, University of Waterloo captured him and brought him here. So he did graduation in IT with chemical engineering degree, and then he came here and did masters of chemical engineering. And then once they all came here, then straight away they got jobs in different companies. I believe my father got the job in what was back then oil, actually. So that's how he came to Canada. It's different than it is today, where people sort of self-motivate and come. He actually told me that he became engineer, but when he was a kid, he didn't know. He really didn't know engineer. All he thought engineer was the man who drives the train. And he said, "I want to do that." In fact, he told me that he was never a good student, except that when he found out what engineer is, train driver, and he had heard that, oh, you have to be very smart and you have to have good marks, then he applied himself to studies. And from 8th grade, he said that I never ever came second in the class after that. उन्होंने ये भी बताया कि जब हाई स्कूल का कुछ स्टेट एग्जाम होता है, out of all the people who would be writing in those days across the whole state, which he estimated it would be close to a million people, like 10 lakh log,
Wow.
would be writing that exam, and his number came number 6.
Wow. Okay.
So he said, even at that level, like top 1,000 is still top 0.1%. So what is the difference between number 1, number 6? You can't really say, right? Like it's one of those situations where yes, it's a rank, but it's also, he said that if you're anywhere in top 1,000 out of a million, it's the same thing, isn't it?
And yeah,
70.
I completely understand what he means by that, because even in today's day it's the same. If anything, it actually has gotten worse in a way that there is more competition now in that country, right? Because the population has exploded over there in the last 15, 20, 30 years, right?
Both of my parents, they are from Kasganj. That's the name of the town. When we used to go to India, like as kids, it used to take about 5-6 hours by car, because in those days there was no highway, right? I think nowadays, if you do it, it's like not even 2 hours. because they've got a proper highway now. But it wasn't very far, right? I don't think it was even, I mean, we can look in the map, it was maybe 30, 40 kilometers from Aligarh. That's the location that
Gotcha.
they're in, if that helps you.
Okay. And did they ever tell you any stories that if they had to make any sacrifices to come to Canada, or as you were explaining, that was
Yeah.
it just happened that way?
I would say that my father, as I understand it, I don't think he had to make any sacrifice, in the sense that because he was recruited from his place of study by University. As I understand it, like they gave him full scholarship. They gave him, the travel expense, everything he needed to come over because they wanted him, right? Just like his friend group.
Yeah.
And so what the stories I hear from them are that they were actually studying. While they were studying, they had more scholarship than the expenses. So they were actually making money while studying, because the amount of scholarship and, I guess, grants, bursaries, whatever the structure was in those days, they were being compensated more than what the expenses of studies were. So he said, like, yeah, I mean, I was saving money at that stage.
Yeah. And then,
So
do you remember when if he ever told you that when he came here, did he have any intentions to just study and go back, or he came with an open mind, wherever life takes him?
he told me he was just going with the flow, whatever. Like he said he didn't have any plan or anything in mind as such. He just went with the flow, whatever came.
Okay.
So he was not. But one thing I do know, I think he was happy that he got out of India. So I think based on that, I don't think he ever would have had it in his mind to go back to India, at least to live.
Okay. And do you remember him telling you how did he get a permanent status here? Like how things were back in the day?
No, he never told me anything, and I never questioned it. Like, I understand your question, why you would ask this question. It's because nowadays people are fighting to immigrate, right? They're fighting to leave their country and they want to come to Canada or they want to come to US. So they are going through a procedure where they are initiating. In the case of my father, he didn't initiate it. The institution called University initiated. And then after that, I think it was foil that would have, if he didn't get the immigration. But also you have to remember, back in those days there wasn't so many laws, right? Like Canada was wide open for immigration. There wasn't this problem. Like, I don't even think in those days there was such a thing as an illegal immigrant.
Yeah, I heard that from others too. Like back in 1960s or even 70s, there was no set process of how to immigrate to Canada.
Yeah, that's how it was, right? Because you have to remember also the dynamics of Canada was, especially in those days, the population of Canada was dependent on immigration because the death rate was higher than the birth rate.
Yeah, that makes sense. And where did you grow up and where were you born? Let's start with that.
Yeah, yeah. I was born in Toronto, Toronto General Hospital, actually, downtown. And my parents tell me that I guess for the most of the first 2 years, they were living in an apartment, and my mother, as I understand it, insisted that they have to have a house right now that there's a kid. So then they bought the house in Scarborough, and uh, and that's where I grew up.
Okay. And while growing up, were there a lot of immigrants and their kids around, or were you like the only one in the neighborhood?
I was the only Indian when I started the school, like when I started in junior kindergarten, I was the only Indian child, actually, only brown child. No, the street I grew up on, like in our crescent, basically, our one neighbor on the right side was Iranian.
Hmm.
Okay, but they didn't have kids at the time I started school, right? They were younger. And then then the next neighbor in the same direction is white. Then after that, the next neighbor was also white. Then the next neighbor was Chinese. It's like this, right? And then on the left side of us, the other direction I go, then it's a Chinese neighbor, then a Filipino guy
Hmm.
family. And like that, so then there's mixture. Right? Then you would find you continue. You'll get an Italian family or two Italian families, and then you'll get another Filipino family, then another Chinese family, like this. So it was very mixed. It was very mixed. But I was the only brown guy.
Okay.
So it was interesting because at home, I only spoke Hindi. Really, I knew English. My mother taught me English, but like conversationally, I was in Hindi. It was an interesting dynamic because again, like no other Indians, right? I didn't associate with any other Indian people, and all of my parents' friends also did not yet have children. So even when they had like family gathering, I was the only kid. And so the dynamics were interesting for me because they didn't know how to behave with kids. Okay. Like everything is just novelty. Everything is fun. So like I've heard stories of they'll have a family gathering, everybody's there. And I'm like 6 or 8 months, I'm crawling around. And one of the uncles decides that I should sip his whiskey. Then somebody makes a comment. He was rolling the ball fine and catching it before. Like they would sit with me, play with me with the ball. And now, इधर लुढ़क रहा है, इधर गिर रहा है, ये क्या हो गया? And then किसी ने बोला, मैंने एक ही सिप पिलाया. किसी और ने बोला, अरे मेरे champagne से इसने मुंह लगा लिया. Oh shit, dad, he's had a whole drink, right? So, like this, and then they're having a laugh. I mean, these are things which today would be very inappropriate, right? But back then, nobody knew, nobody thought, nobody cared, right? In fact, I was like subject of a lot of teasing among them. Not that they had any bad intention, it's just that once again, they didn't know how to behave. So they used to play jokes on me all the time. They used to send me somewhere to find something which isn't there, and then I come back and they make me run around. So this idea of teasing was a lot. Why I'm telling you this is because then when I went to school the first day, I was speaking to people in Hindi. And nobody knew this language. So my 3.5-year-old brain said, this is another trick they played on me. They made me learn this thing which I cannot use. And so I stopped speaking Hindi. I came home after school that day and I spoke in English to my parents only. They spoke to me in Hindi and I responded in English from then on for a long, long time.
Yeah, that's because your mind got played.
The story I constructed
Yeah.
was what it was. I'm not saying they did that. Let's be clear. I'm not saying that anybody did anything, but this is the interpretation as a 3.5-year-old kid that I made. And so I missed out then. I missed out a lot of things because of that.
From that point on, you never spoke in Hindi with your parents ever after, or it kind of
Not
changed later on?
Yeah, it came basically when we would go for trips to India, then I spoke in Hindi with everybody else, but not my parents. And then eventually, when I became adult and I made the decision that I knew I wanted to marry from India and I wanted to marry an Indian girl and everything, then I focused on becoming better in speaking Hindi. And now, if I speak with my parents, I will speak mixed.
Hmm. Yeah, we'll talk about your marriage and how did you make that decision in a little while, right? So when you were growing up, did you feel different in the school in a
Absolutely.
negative manner? That
Oh yeah, no, it was quite bad. Like I mean, because again, see, back then there was lots of racism, lots of stereotyping. Like when I was in school, everybody used to call me Paki because
that's
I
a
knew they call.
derogatory term, yeah.
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 So they used to call me this, and I used to get very mad. I used to say, "I'm not from Pakistan. I'm Indian." So they were very relentless, right? And I used to get picked on, beat up quite a lot. It was quite vicious bullying in those days. People used to be verbally and physically very, 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 very brutal.
Which decade are we talking about here?
Yes, so we're talking now like late 1970s and early 80s.
Okay.
They were very extreme incidents. I had a couple of them. One of them was, we on the same street on the other corner of the crescent. There's four families there. They were all related, four families. So brothers, sisters, cousins. So they had a big group of about, I guess, in the four houses. I think there was 9 or 10 of them. So, for example, like one of the bullying they would do If I'm riding my bike, if I ride across their house, they would take hockey sticks and throw it like javelins at my wheel. And one time they got it. It went into the front wheel, and then I flipped the bike and I went down. And I was, so this, and then they would come. See, it wasn't just that happened. Then they would come and then they would beat on me. I couldn't. I'm already the hawa nikal gaya, and then on top of it,
And
there
it
was
was
a big
without any reason. It's just because how you looked.
because no, because I'm a Paki. Right?
Hmm.
That's it. That's the reason. And in the school, things like that. Even my name, because my name is Manu, so then it becomes. So I had been teased for my name a lot. Also, it's something that used to happen, right? It was normal then. I think it was not good, but it's not also out of the boundaries of what was normal then.
If there was any colored kid, you would expect that this would happen to you.
I think so. I think it was a comment for on the base of race to be right.
Were there any reverse of this happening? Like, for example, any kids ganging up and beating some kids or something like that? Or no, it was
Raman,
one way only.
a gang requires two or more people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was no group forming. There was no group because there weren't. Like I know at the time you came, it's very different. So maybe you cannot imagine. But like another thing I can like just to help you understand, right? There was one grocery store like in pretty much all of Toronto. So it used to take like my parents didn't have cars, so it used to be a cab ride of about 40 minutes to go to the Indian grocery store. So we used to buy supply, dal, chawal, atta, ye sab, on a 6-month basis because the cab ride by itself was so expensive. There was no dahi in the grocery store. Dahi was made at home. There was no sweets to have. Whatever we ate sweets, my mother learned. ये गोला का बर्फी बना लो, बेसन का बर्फी बना लो, बालू शाही तक बनाई मम्मी ने. So there was nothing available. Whatever Indian food I ate, my mother made it. There was no such thing as Indian restaurant. There was nothing. And then finally, when there was an Indian restaurant, they were making it to cater to white population because that was the customer. So it wasn't good for us anyway. Right? The dynamics have changed a lot now. Like it's not recognizable anymore.
In terms of your teachers and, you know, if you went to college or university, then your professors and lecturers over there, how were they with you? Were they okay?
Yeah, well, that's a big span of time you're talking about, right? From grade school to high school to university, right? Like that's a big span of time. So in my grade school, there I experienced mostly it was actually fine, and I even had some teachers who were very sensitive to the fact that they knew I was being picked on and racially, singled out, just like other kids, like for example, Chinese kids who were also in the same class. So they were very good for the most part, very like inclusive, I would say. But I did have two different teachers who they were clearly also racist type. Like for example, I would give a right answer, and they would say it's wrong, and then I would defend my answer, and they would just shut me up. By comparison, another kid who's not immigrant in a similar scenario, the teacher would hear that person out even if they're wrong, and then respectfully correct them. So there were some cases when I was in grade school. There were two teachers who I experienced. I think it was clearly a racism, and one of them was teaching math, which was impossible to, like, you cannot do subjective grading in math. But I never had a test where I had where I didn't have to go to them and say, my solution is correct, my solution is complete, it's showing the steps. Why did you cut the marks? I mean, it's clear. There was no argument in it. But and I would even compare paper with somebody else, and almost identical solution. I'm getting a different mark. So I experienced it. In high school, I did not experience any of that with teachers, and in university, the professor doesn't even know who you are, right? So there was none of that.
If we continue talking about then versus now, what's the biggest change that you would say that you have seen from your parents' time to today's time in terms of immigrant experience in addition to the racism? Do you see anything else?
Again, I'm not an immigrant, right? Because I didn't immigrate here. I'm born here. My parents immigrated here, and lots of people immigrate here. And my view, my belief, my understanding, and also I should say, right, I did leave Canada for a time to live in the United States. I was attracted to go there, and I did. I did go there in the beginning of my career. So when I went there with the mindset of there's something better there than what I have here. I want to go and be part of that. I want to be included in that. I want to join that. So if I believe that's the mindset of people who are immigrating to Canada, then I think then their mindset must be that want they are leaving something for a better opportunity. They are coming here because they believe there's something here better, and that's why they're leaving what they have. So if that's the case, then when you come here, why would you bring all those negative things that you're trying to leave along with you here and bring them here and create them here? I'm not saying that you abandon your culture or I should abandon my traditions. That's not what I'm saying. But at the same time, there are things that I'm leaving. There's some reason that I'm leaving where I am. And those reasons, whatever they may be, why would I bring them here? Why would I create them here? And I feel that many immigrant populations are doing that. And so they're bringing the negative things along. Why not bring the positive things and partake of what's positive here and respect what's positive here and have the best of both? Okay, so that's the change I'm seeing. I'm seeing that in the past, the new immigrants who came, they had the trouble of being accepted. Now, in some ways, it's the mirror image of that.
Yeah, well, that's true. So, how did your parents keep you close to the culture?
So one thing, I mean, in my home, my mother, वो तो अपना घर में मंदिर होती थी, right? She always did puja every day. So I saw it. And then, of course, on special occasion, Diwali, Holi, etc., then
Right.
as a family, we did puja. So that's one thing that was there. And then family gatherings, other families around those times. Again, there was no mandir, public mandir that we would go to. And if it was, again, in our situation, family didn't have cars, so we didn't used to go. Even if there was some mandir starting and all, we didn't used to go there. So I didn't have much of interaction in a community sense. So the answer to your question, in short, is it was difficult. The main thing that kept me connected is that they took us for trips to India. So I had several trips to India, and I got the chance to live there in the culture, live in our town, meet my family members, because in my case, none of my father's relatives and none of my mother's relatives have come to Canada.
Right.
So I don't have that interaction also. So the only time I met any uh, extended family member is when we went to India. And I used to love it. I enjoyed. So that is the thing. That is, if there's one thing I can say that kept me connected, it was that, because I got a feeling there that I never got anywhere else.
So, how old were you when you first went to India?
I was very small. If I'm not wrong, I think maybe before the age of 2, my parents told me that they took me. I was younger than 2. Maybe I was 6 months, maybe I was 2 years.
So
But in
you
that,
remember obviously that one.
I don't remember that. The first trip I remember, I was, I guess, 6 years old.
And
So we went for my chacha's marriage. I enjoyed that
do you
because I got,
remember how that experience was like? Was it pleasant?
oh yeah, I was the king. मैं बोलूं मुझे ये खाना है वो बनता था वो आता था मुझे ये करना है तो वो होता I was the king. I was the king.
Okay, then we fast forward a little bit and let's talk about your marriage. So tell us about how did you find your wife, and what made you think about getting married to someone who came from India? Because I know your wife moved from India to here after your marriage, right?
There's several things I can share about it, right? It's a little bit long. So, as I was growing up here and I had the chance to go to India, so I was experiencing here, life in India. And I was seeing, because by then there started to become some population of Indian immigrants here, right? And by then, when Mandir got well established, and also my father was involved in an organization called Hindi Parishad, right, for preservation of Hindi language.
Hmm.
And so I got to meet more Indian families and more Indian teenagers, basically. And then I became active in the youth group of that organization. I became the president, actually. Yeah, I think when I was around 17 or 18 years old of that group, of that youth group. And so we were doing cultural activities. We were doing different programs. I started to become more closer to our culture, and then I by then I'm also having some trips to India, and I started to observe that, and I don't know if it's there anymore today, but in those days, there was a very big double standard on the kids. Okay. If you were a boy, you had a lot more freedom. If you were a girl, you had no freedoms. You could not socialize. And so it was a very restrictive environment for girls. And I think that my feeling, my observation was that as a result, the girls, as I had conversations with them, they weren't able to have complete conversations, well rounded conversations. They weren't able to talk on subjects. They weren't able to express opinions about what they aspire to, what they want to be, what they want to do. I think they were kind of in a limbo. That's how I felt. That's how I interpreted. And it was impossible to sit and have a deep conversation. That's what I experienced. And so I felt like there was a difference in the sense of identity. I thought about the prospect of trying to build a relationship with somebody who has not sort of had that opportunity to mature, if that's a fair thing to say. And so I started to have the idea that maybe I should try to find a wife in India. But I was still very young. Like I wasn't committed to anything, but I started to have that idea. And then, after I completed university and I started working, that's when I moved to US. And while I was living there, because I was in IT field, the company I worked for decided to open an office in Bangalore. They asked me to help stand up that office. So I interviewed a lot of candidates in India from different institutes. And then I was traveling to Bangalore. And so, because I was traveling on the company's budget to Bangalore, it was very cheap for me to personally travel back to Delhi and go to my hometown and start things. Once I was spending time there, that's when it clicked. I said, yeah, I want to marry a girl from India. And that's when I asked my parents' help. And we started to look for people there. And my family then started the process. And through that process, one of the girls I met was, and so that's the way it happened.
So it was an arranged marriage for you.
It was arranged, but again, I had made sure that she had full freedom, and I knew I had full freedom to make the choice, and that's how.
That's awesome. Is there anything from values standpoint that you learned from your parents' journey, and you followed those values in your life, and then you would also want to pass those on to your kids?
Wow, yeah, that's an interesting question. I learned many things from their example. They had a very different situation than I have. Their situation, they were just two of them, and then I got born, and then my brother got born, right? So pressures that were on my father were great because he had to make sure that our family could survive and thrive. And he also was supporting back home in India. What can I say? His whole time was spent working when I was young. Yes, socializing a little bit. We used to do some socializing, have family party at home. We did some vacations, some travel, and we used to go camping. We did some travel. We visited Disney World and things like this. But most of the time, he was very busy. And so the value there was, of course, I learned focus. I learned you stay on target. You have to achieve what you need to achieve. But on the counterbalance of that, I felt that you also have to enjoy. And I learned from that I'm not going to be that way. I'm going to make sure I give time to my kids. If they have interest, I want them to develop it. I want to support it. That's something I learned, and that's something I try to do. So, yes, identify your talent, identify what you're good at. And once you do, then you focus and you work hard towards it. And I believe that's what, my children are doing. And, I'm happy for that. So I think the difference here is that many times there's a tendency, especially for the immigrants with their first generation kids, they actually want to prescribe the life for them. I've seen this a lot. You will become doctor, you will become engineer, the typical stuff, right? It's good for you. Get, this education because this will make you earn a lot of money. And I guess money, yes, it's important, no doubt. But at the same time, enjoying the day is very important too, right? I think that's something that I've tweaked. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So, what do you identify as today? Would you identify as a Canadian, Indo-Canadian, or something else? How would you call yourself today?
It's a very, very tough question, honestly, because I can tell you this. When I go to India, I know I belong here. I feel that in my heart. When I'm here, then I know I'm a Canadian and I only know it in my head. But I know that I belong to that soil.
Amazing. Finally, Manu, any advice that you would give to any immigrants who have their kids growing up and born in this country? Anything that you, from your experience, would like to pass on to other people?
Yeah, I think that I would say that. I would say, try to try to have some awareness and connection to your purpose for being here. Did you come here because you were running away from something? Did you come here because you were being pulled towards something? And so, as an immigrant, I'm just sharing it from that perspective. I know in my case, as an immigrant, when I became an immigrant to USA, I was being pulled towards something. And so I wanted to get everything good there. And I wanted to leave those things that were not so good behind. So, as an immigrant, I would say, please try to remember that you came here for that purpose. And just consider if your day to day life is consistent with that purpose. As for the children, remember that as a parent, your children didn't make the same choice you made. They are here because of your choice. In terms of having expectations, I mean, normally we know expectations aren't always, the best thing to have anyway. Our Dharma teaches us that.
Right.
Remember, they are not in the same environment that you grew up in. It's a completely different environment. You were raised by parents who were raised in the same environment as you. So I'll just repeat that, right? Raman, your parents grew up in India and they raised you in India. Their ability to relate with your experience is much greater. As an immigrant who has a first generation descendant, they're growing up in a different environment than you grew up in. So you have to be flexible and sensitive and open to the idea that there are things you simply don't know, and there are things which you will interpret in the context of your growing up that may seem wrong. But in this environment, They may not be wrong. There's internal environment and external environment, and the external environment is different here. So therefore, internal environment may need to adjust rather than being judgmental and conclusive. We have to be open and thoughtful.
That's amazing. Thanks, Manu. With that, we come to the end to this session. I really appreciate your time, and I wish you all the best and your family all the best. And we'll chat again.
Thanks, Raman. I enjoyed it, and most welcome. Bye bye.